What's really happening in Iran? A country that seemed quiet has suddenly become the center of one of the largest military escalations in years.
It's not easy for us.
We have nowhere to go, nothing left. What should we do? Is this fair?
News kept coming, official statements echo, and maps fill up news broadcasts around the world. Just one search floods you with updates, numbers, and speculation. But beneath all that, what is Iran actually living through right now? In this episode of NVL Travel Documentary, we will bring you a whole new perspective, but it holds some of the deepest consequences of this conflict. Number 1. Panorama between Iran. Israel some days begin with an ordinary ray of sunlight and end with an airstrike that changes the course of a nation's history. On June 12, 2025, the Israel Defense Forces issued an urgent warning, ordering the immediate evacuation of all residents in District 18 of Tehran. This densely populated urban area houses both military installations and civilian housing, a layout not uncommon in the Iranian capital. At around 3:30 in the morning, the next day, the first wave of airstrikes was recorded in Tehran. Iranian state media reported that civilian targets had also been affected, not just military infrastructure. Almost simultaneously, the Natanz nuclear facility, located over 220 kilometers south of Tehran, was struck, causing significant damage. It's worth noting that Natanz is one of Iran's most critical uranium enrichment centers. The operation was codenamed Rising Lion by the Israeli government and was personally directed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He stated that the objective was to cripple the core of Iran's nuclear program and warned that, without intervention, Iran could reach nuclear weapons capability in a very short time. In response, Iranian authorities rejected the allegations, insisting their nuclear program is purely peaceful. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, in its latest report from March this year, confirmed that Iran was still allowing oversight at key nuclear facilities, including both Natanz and Fordow. By the evening of the same day, Iran launched a counteroffensive under the name True Promise 3, firing approximately 100 ballistic missiles and deploying dozens of unmanned aerial vehicles, targeting military bases in southern Israel. While most of the projectiles were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome defense system, several areas sustained minor damage. The confrontation stretched over 12 days, resulting in 935 deaths in Iran, the majority of whom were civilians. Military energy and communication infrastructure was severely impacted. Meanwhile, the tit-for-tat strike sent shockwaves through global energy markets. Brent crude oil prices surged over 10% in the first 5 days alone. The broader picture reveals a stark reality. These are no longer warning shots. This is a real, calculated, and sustained military conflict with far-reaching consequences for regional politics, global economics, and civilian life on both sides. But after all the bombs, the strikes, and the speeches, what does life in Iran really look like now? And what do those living in the ruins have to say? Number 2. Scale of civil disaster. In any military campaign, the last thing left behind is never just rubble, it's the loss of human life. According to Iran's judiciary, 935 people were confirmed dead after just 12 days of airstrikes. Among them, 38 children and 132 women. That figure doesn't include the more than 4,700 people injured, many of whom may never fully recover. Earlier health ministry reports had recorded 610 deaths in the first few days alone, suggesting just how quickly the conflict escalated beyond anything Tehran had anticipated. Multiple international agencies, including Reuters and the Associated Press, verified that the vast majority of casualties were civilians. Not military personnel, not nuclear scientists, but families, people who were sleeping, cooking, walking home from school. And while the world watched, Natanz and Isfahan nuclear and military targets weren't the only things burning. In Isfahan, 4 buildings within the nuclear complex, including the uranium conversion center, were badly damaged. The Natanz facility, considered the core of Iran's nuclear program, was hit hard enough to delay uranium enrichment by several months, if not longer. But the scale of destruction did not stop at military infrastructure. Key government and defense compounds were bombed across the country. From the Ministry of Defense headquarters in Tehran to radar stations and missile warehouses scattered across Qom and Tabriz. The Mehrabad airport, used for both civilian and logistical military transport, also sustained structural damage. More troubling, though, was the impact on civilian life. A 14-story residential tower near Nobonyad Square collapsed entirely, killing 60 people, including 20 children who had been sleeping on the upper floors. In Shah-e-Reh, an oil depot exploded after a precision strike, blanketing the sky in smoke and cutting fuel access to large portions of the capital. Entire districts went dark when electricity substations were hit, and gas pipelines ruptured, sending shockwaves through already fragile neighborhoods. And nowhere felt this more acutely than the city's southern fringe District 18, where poverty had already left people one disaster away from collapse. When the missiles came, they didn't just destroy homes, they take away already fragile security of living here. But if you think that's the full extent of what a single air campaign can do, that would be a mistake, because the consequences don't stop there. And in the next chapter, we go deeper into the human cost that can't be counted on paper. So stay till the end of the video. Listen carefully, because what comes next isn't just what happened, it's what's still happening. Number 3. Widespread disruption of life. At 7 in the morning, the line outside a bakery in Russia already curled around 2 blocks. Children clutched empty plastic bags, some held small coins. The store was due to open in 10 minutes, but a man halfway down the queue whispered that the bread might already be gone. This scene repeated across the north and northwest of Iran, not because bakeries had closed, but because supply trucks had stopped coming. Flatbread, once the cheapest food on any table, had become almost unreachable. In one village near Kazvin, the price had jumped to 4 times its pre-war cost. In Tehran, the pattern was the same. Grocery store shelves emptied without drama. Bottles of cooking oil vanished in a day. Powdered milk and sanitary pads became items people asked for in low voices, unsure if they still existed behind the counter. Vendors gave up shouting about vegetables. Every night, unsold greens were tossed in buckets, not because they'd spoiled, but because no one dared spend extra reals on lettuce when rice was uncertain. Conversely, in parts of southern Tehran, residents began bringing cold tea and water out to their neighbors. When life gets tough, what brings people closer together is togetherness. But a difficult life is not just about those things. Even a person's health can be affected. Among the elderly and chronically ill, the power cuts brought silence far more dangerous than any explosion. At least 22 people died, not from injury, but from missing dialysis or losing power to oxygen machines. In Kermanshah, a welfare warehouse holding mobility aids burned to the ground. With no fuel to send replacements, entire households were left with no way to move forward. Displaced families, especially Afghan migrants, reported being denied entry to public shelters. Near Fashafuye, 3 families spent nights inside their cars parked near construction sites. windows half open in the 40-degree heat. If even humans are rejected, would animals be treated any differently? In Saadat Abad, volunteers turned Parvaz Park into a makeshift shelter for 30 abandoned disks. Survivors of homes that could no longer carry one more mouth to feed. They are the clearest evidence of survival, and altogether they paint a vivid picture of ordinary life under bombing. Number 4. The chaotic evacuation. But worse than the blackout, worse than the shortage, was this: people had started losing faith in their own government. By the second week of airstrikes, Tehran wasn't just wounded, it was unraveling. Streets once built to connect were now jammed with cars trying to leave. At the western gates of the capital, vehicles stretched for kilometers, barely moving under the searing 40-degree heat. Many drivers shut off their engines to save the last drops of fuel. Air conditioning was out of the question. People leaned against doors with damp towels pressed to their faces. The city, once frantic, now breathed in a slow, suffocating rhythm. Those who could afford to leave found the price rising by the hour. A single taxi ride from Tehran to Gilan was being offered for 80 million rial, about $160, more than most Iranians earn in a month. In the south, drivers in Bandar Abbas refused to accept payment in rial at all. They demanded American dollars paid up front, no exceptions. For many, trains were the only alternative. But that lifeline broke too. After a drone strike on Qom railway station, 4 national train lines were shut down. Hundreds of people were stranded in dark terminals with no running announcements, no staff, and no way to leave. Some abandoned their tickets and walked out into the streets, hoping to find buses that were no longer running. On the 18th of June, 3 nationwide internet blackouts left families without contact direction or any real understanding of what was happening around them. Students at Amir Kabir and Tehran Markazi University began sleeping fully dressed shoes on bags packed. In emergency clinics, calls related to panic attacks and sleep disorders had tripled. No one knew where the next missile would land or whether help would come at all. With official media locked in cycles of military briefings, people turned to whatever information they could find. But in that vacuum, unverified rumors flooded social media claims of radiation leaks in eastern Tehran and worse, chemical warheads. These were never confirmed, but tens of thousands still fled north, driven more by fear than fact. Analysts later traced a surge in anonymous search traffic, a sign that people no longer trusted anyone. Not authorities, not neighbors, not even their own phones. And in that moment, Iran wasn't just under attack. It was unanchored, confused, and walking in the dark. Number 5. Iran's miscalculations. If Rising Lion left a lasting mark, it wasn't only on Iran's infrastructure, it was on the assumptions that shaped its response. In the lead-up to the strikes, Tehran believed the political landscape was shifting. The visible tensions between Washington and Tel Aviv over Gaza were seen as deeper fractures. Many in Iran interpreted this as a signal that large-scale escalation would be discouraged or even blocked entirely by international pressure. But the reality proved more complex than that. When a series of targeted assassinations began across the region, Iran viewed them as isolated events, short-term reactions, not part of a broader pattern. There was a belief that Israel's security apparatus was overextended, focused inward since the crisis of October. That belief, however, left critical blind spots. What looked like scattered moves were in fact early stages of a larger coordinated strategy. Tehran didn't just misread intentions, it misjudged timing. The 60-day deadline set by previous U.S. administrations was treated more like political noise than an actionable warning. By the time the deadline passed, missile strikes had already begun. and one wrong step can lead to many more wrong steps. Iran viewed renewed nuclear talks as an indication of weakened resolve from the international community, not as part of a multi-layered negotiation. This misreading led to decisions based on the assumption that there would be more time. Believing it had room to maneuver, Iran continued to enrich itself. Meanwhile, changes on the ground in Syria added further complication. With long-standing supply lines disrupted and internal instability mounting a key pillar in Iran's regional posture, began to shift. In the end, it wasn't about who had more power, but of who can recognize sooner. The cost of delayed recalibration was felt not in political chambers, but in the streets. In disrupted transport routes, in hospitals without power, in families forced to abandon homes they thought were safe. Strategy at its core is not only about projections, it's about preparation. And sometimes the harshest consequences come not from the opponent's actions, but from expecting the world to stay the same when it already has not. Number 6. Tensions continue. Operation Rising Lion may have ended on paper, but in practice it opened a prolonged phase of strategic uncertainty. Tehran's blind spots had been exposed, but what remained wasn't just damage, it was tension. Even as the missile fire stopped, the air didn't feel any lighter. This time, Iran is not standing still, but is recalculating its mistakes to make another move. According to sources close to the leadership, the Iranian government now believed it had entered a position of unprecedented domestic unity. That support, drawn not only from citizens inside the country, but also from Iranian communities abroad, was seen as a form of legitimacy. A national will they believed that could sustain a larger confrontation if it came to that. Within internal briefings, Tehran referred to this moment as a historic opportunity, one that might allow it to neutralize what it called the ongoing threat from Israel once and for all. But while those words projected confidence, the reality was far more delicate. Iran's leadership was fully aware of the geopolitical risk. They knew that any extended conflict could invite military intervention from the United States. Documents reviewed by regional analysts even note the possibility of direct American involvement in defense of Israel should the conflict escalate. However, Tehran maintained that it would be capable of overcoming the challenge. But confidence inside the halls of power didn't erase the quiet anxiety still unfolding outside them. Fuel lines stretched for blocks, not because people were moving, but because they were staying ready. Airports ran on partial schedules not for lack of traffic, but because flight paths were redrawn daily. Across the cities, families still kept emergency bags packed not from panic, but from memory. They had seen how quickly routine could dissolve. The government might have been planning for the next strategic response, but civilians were planning for the next siren. Inside Tehran, the atmosphere didn't resemble recovery. It resembled rehearsal for something that might come again just as fast and just as destabilizing. And that dissonance between the narrative of strength and the quiet endurance of daily fear defined the weeks that followed. This wasn't a ceasefire. It was a suspended breath, a nation caught between strategic posture and human exhaustion. Still calculating, still bracing, and still not certain where the next pressure would come from. Number 7. Elon Musk actions. At a time when tensions showed no signs of easing, a single move from beyond Iran's borders added a new layer to the unfolding crisis. Not of destruction, but of connection. On June 13th, the Iranian government officially confirmed sweeping internet restrictions across the country. The Ministry of Communications described the blackout as a temporary measure triggered by a series of Israeli airstrikes targeting strategic military infrastructure. Officials assured the public that the shutdown would be lifted once conditions stabilized. But for ordinary citizens already dealing with blackouts, fuel shortages, and blocked transport routes, the sudden digital silence felt more like a curtain being pulled. One that cut off families, isolated communities, and left entire cities in the dark with no clear timeline. Then, just one day later, a quiet message broke through that silence. Elon Musk, founder of SpaceX, announced on Platform X that Starlink, his company's satellite internet service, had been activated over Iran. The statement was short, but the implications were immediate. With mobile networks still down and local ISPs throttled, this signal from space offered an unexpected alternative. Starlink is no stranger to crisis zones. It has played a vital role in Ukraine, helping civilians and emergency workers stay connected under fire. In regions where traditional infrastructure was either bombed or heavily censored, it became the only viable bridge to the outside world. Now it was doing the same in Iran, quietly, remotely, but effectively. However, access remained limited. Specialized terminals, power sources, and a level of risk made it inaccessible to most. But for those who managed to connect even briefly, the experience was profound. In Tehran, a medical student was able to check in with family abroad. In Rasht, a clinic downloaded emergency guidelines. In Kazvin, a teacher shared a photo to prove her school was still standing. Starlink could not undo the blackout, but it sent a signal both literal and symbolic that even under tight control, information still finds a way forward. In the shadows of conflict, where silence is often weaponized, that quiet thread of connection became one of the most powerful signs that not all voices had been lost. Number who will be the loser, right or wrong, no matter which side holds the microphone or draws the map when war breaks out. It is always the ordinary people who pay the highest price. This is not an opinion nor a political position. It is a pattern that has repeated itself across decades, borders, and ideologies. Inside conflict zones, missiles don't ask who voted for whom. Sirens don't wait for the innocent to move. And fear doesn't distinguish between the front line and the back alley. Civilians caught between declarations and retaliation become the quiet center of a storm they never chose. In the southern districts of Tehran, the slums that once survived heat waves, inflation, and neglect are now bearing something far heavier: the aftermath of a war they did not start. Cracked apartment walls, broken pipelines, and collapsed stairwells tell the story better than any headline can. These are not military zones. These are places where families used to cook, where children used to sleep, and where silence now says more than words. And while leaders speak in terms of deterrence or defense, those terms have no meaning to someone trying to find clean water or to someone whose home vanished in a single night. In times of war, every mistake at the top becomes a wound at the bottom. And the farther you are from the decision, the closer you seem to be to its consequences. This conflict, like so many before it, will be analyzed by scholars, dissected by media, and measured in timelines and treaties. But long before history judges who was right or wrong, the people on the ground have already lived through what can never be undone. And perhaps that is the most honest lesson of all, that in the theater of war, no side truly wins when those with the least to lose are always the ones who lose the most. War redraws maps, but it also rewrites lives. Sometimes in silence, sometimes in ash. As we've seen throughout this journey into post-strike Iran, the real weight of conflict doesn't rest in military reports or diplomatic headlines. It lives in the losses borne by innocent people, in the quiet suffering caused by decisions they neither made nor asked for. These are the costs that rarely make it into press conferences, but they last far longer than any ceasefire. At NVL Travel Documentary, we believe that to truly understand a place, you must not only see what it has, but what it has endured. Thank you for watching. And if you found this story worth hearing, don't forget to like and subscribe to NVL Travel Documentary.